bad addict. Every time I was able to get a loan, I was doing drugs.
I've been to prison 4 times, twice in the state, twice in the fed.
I was doing all this crazy stuff, cooking drugs and just staying high.
God called me from a prison cell. I was a homeless drug addict, and my hope was found in a needle.
I was 8 months pregnant, homeless, living out of my van.
You know, it wasn't Freeway that saved me, it wasn't John Stroup that saved me, but God uses Freeway in such a mighty way as a tool to reach these people.
There's not a community or a county in America that doesn't have a drug problem. And the church has the answer, and it's the gospel of Jesus Christ. Welcome to One Broken Life. My name is John Stroup with my special guest, Joey Candillo.
Hi, good to be here.
Glad to have you, brother.
Thanks.
One Broken Life is a production of Freeway Ministries, and we love to explore the broken lives of individuals that have come from all kinds of different backgrounds, but many times it's the bigger the mess, the bigger the message, and we peel back the layers and look into the intimate details of people's lives. And so I'm privileged and honored today to have Pastor Joey from Grace Church in Independence, Missouri, with us today. And so I'm glad you tuned in to join us. We have like theme verses for our podcast, Joey.
Okay.
One of the theme verses is Psalms 51:17, and basically the Lord is speaking about sacrifices and worship, and He says, the sacrifices of God are a broken heart and a contrite spirit, that God will not despise or reject a broken heart. And that's kind of our idea, is that one broken life at a time, right? And so we're going to explore your brokenness, like where you were before you surrendered your life to Jesus, and now you're a pastor, your second church, and growing recovery ministry. We're going to talk about that, but that isn't who you used to be, right? And so we're going to kind of just, people met you today and they come in your church on a Sunday morning, they see you and hear you preach, they wouldn't realize what you've been through. And so we're going to get an intimate detail of your life in your past. And then Philippians 1:12, Paul says, "Brethren, I want you to know the things which have happened to me have actually turned out for the furtherance of the gospel." So what Paul is saying is, he says that the pronoun things that have happened to me, all the things in the past, the hardships and all the tragedies and all the painful things in his life have turned out to make the gospel go further. And I believe that is your story. That's my story. And so could you just give us just a few minutes here? What was your life like growing up?
Well, we didn't go to church growing up. I wasn't raised in church. I mean, my mom and dad they grew up Catholic, but they never really went to church. And so my mom would tell me about God a little bit, but we never, like I said, never went to church. We weren't reading the Bible together. And my dad was an alcoholic, and I got this whole story about that defined my life. Everybody's got child trauma. You know, some people are worse than others. But when my brother died, when I was 4 years old, we were living in California, and that really messed me up for the rest of my life. And I didn't know how to process that. The thing about that is it was my fault. I caught this car on fire, and my brother died. Well, after that happened, not only was I jacked up, my dad became a real bad alcoholic and verbally abusive, physically abusive, would come home and just take his problems out on me. And so it was, you know, my home life wasn't fun to be around. So I was just running the streets at an early age. And, you know, when you're running the streets, you start hanging out with the wrong crowd. You start getting into trouble and going to jail. I went to jail 4 times before I was in the 6th grade, before I was in middle school. And so that was just kind of the pattern that my life was set on. And nobody was surprised, you know, because everyone in my family went to jail. Everybody was on drugs. And so that was when I was growing up in Independence, Missouri, in the in the late 80s, early 90s, Independence was known. There were two things that our claim to fame. We were known for this place where Harry Truman was from, but also we were the meth capital of the world. So we used to always joke about that. There were headlines in the newspaper, national news, about being the meth capital of the world. So everybody was on it, and you know, it just jacks up families. It messes people's lives up. So, but that's kind of, I was raised in that, and so I didn't, you know, I didn't have anybody teaching me right from wrong. I didn't have my dad wasn't taking me fishing. He wasn't taking me to church and going, Joey, this is how you be a man. This is, you know, open doors for women and treat people with respect. I mean, I just didn't have any of that stuff. It was you know, conniving. What I watched my dad steal. I watched my dad, you know, just drinking all the time and doing criminal things. And so that was what I saw. That's what I did with my life, is like, I just trying to scheme the system my whole life. I was trying to just see what I could get out of things. And if I could mess you over, if I could steal from you, that's what I did. So, yeah.
So, when did your drug use start?
I smoked my first joint when I was 7 years old. I was over at my aunt's house, and this is I put this in my book, and it was kind of controversial. She was mad at me for putting it in there, but I was over there, and she had some weed growing in the closet. I was a little kid, 7 years old, and I opened up this closet door. I was like, "Wait, what is this?" And she took some out. She rolled a joint for me, and I remember sitting there smoking it, watching Scooby-Doo. I was like, I guess this is what you're supposed to do," and it was wild. And then my dad, you know, he would be like, "Go get me another beer." 9 years old, 8 years old, and he'd leave a little bit in the bottom of it, and he'd say, "Here, you can drink the rest of that." And so I would, on my way to get him another beer, I would be drinking it. And you know, 12 years old, I started smoking pot a lot, and I never really liked pot. Pot like made me depressed, and always made me paranoid. You know, I'd go to a party and smoke, and everybody looking at me. I just didn't like the effects of it. So, but just early age, you know, just access to it, and so that kind of set me in motion for the kind of life that I was going to live. And so,
Yeah, I was saying, where I'm from, either you're born in it or sworn in it.
oh yeah,
And I was born in it. You was born in it. I don't know if we coined it, but the phrase generational addiction, generational crime, and generational poverty, which basically means everybody you ever known in your family, in your life, growing up, and has been poor, involved in crime, and either a drug addict or a drug dealer or both, you know. And that was me. And so it sounds like the same thing for you. Is a cultural thing. It's normal, right?
Yep.
It's not abnormal to walk in the house and everything smell like weed. You know, it's a normal smell. It's not like something that you're caught off surprise. You know, it's just what it is. And seeing dope, seeing the baggies everywhere, you know, seeing violence and all that stuff. And so how long have you been sober?
In February 9th, it'll be 26 years.
Awesome.
The last time I did any drugs, of course, I caught a case. I sold an 8-ball cocaine to an undercover cop. Apparently they frown on that in Missouri. And I was already on probation. So they gave me a 5-year sentence, and it was this whole ordeal that my lawyers told me he was going to get me off on probation. And then when we went to court, they were like, "Well, he's already on probation." And so you didn't tell me that, so you're going to have to do 120 days. And so now I'm freaking out, because I've been to Independence jail lots of times, the county jail, but I've never been to prison. So that was kind of a wake-up call for me. And at the time, I had a daughter who was almost a year old. And I was one of those people that I was just living hard, getting drunk every day, doing hard drugs. And I was tired of it. I was 22 years old. I was just like, I'm sick of this. I felt like I've lived a whole life, but I didn't know how to quit. Like I would just try to pull myself up by my bootstraps, and just that would last a few days. Then my friends would come over. I get drunk again. So the night before, so they said, "We're going to let you celebrate the holidays with your family." And this is like 1997, February 1997. They said, "You got to turn yourself in and serve this 120 days." And so that night I'm just chilling at home, and my two best friends, Tommy and Jason, they came and knocked on the door. They were like, hey, let's go out. And I'm like, nah, man, I got to go to jail tomorrow. I said, I'm just chilling. They go, no, let's go. So we went out, we went to the casino, and we got real drunk. They had meth, and I showed up the next morning at the county jail to turn myself in, and there was a girl I went to high school with at the reception desk, and she goes, hey, Joey. And I told her the deal, and she goes, are you high? Are you drunk? I was like, I'm going to jail. What do you care? But it was just weird that I would show up that way. I bombed out of my mind. And but that was the last night that I ever did anything. And so went to jail, spent a month in Fulton, and then 3 months in Boonville. Did the 120 days, and it changed my life. That's where I went to. I remember being in there the first day of jail at Fulton. Is just very degrading and humiliating. They strip you down, they throw lye soap on you, and they run you through like cattle. And I'm sitting there going, man, what a piece of crap, man. This is what my life has come to. But kind of back to what you were talking about. That was a normal thing for me in my life, but it didn't make it okay. And it was a real hard pill for me to swallow. That even though I came about it honestly, my dad was an alcoholic and a drug addict, and I became one. I couldn't blame him any longer. You know what I mean? Like I couldn't blame the fact that my brother died and I had all these problems. At some point, I had to say, you know what? I put myself here and my own choices. Yes, did I have a rough life growing up? Sure I did. But a lot of people do, and it wasn't until I figured out that the personal responsibility, until I took responsibility for my own life, that things began to change. And I think God was doing that. I think God was waiting for me to realize that before he could really get a hold of my life. Because as long as I had somebody to blame, and I see that today, man, as long as you got somebody to blame for your problems, you're never gonna get better, because you're never gonna take responsibility. And I can find anybody to blame my problems on, but I think it was Spurgeon that said, if I could kick the person most responsible for my problems, I wouldn't be able to sit down for a week. And that's the way it is. That might have been D.L. Moody, I can't remember, but. So anyways, I went to a chapel service when I was in there, and God was calling me, and I gave my life to Christ that day, and I left that chapel service changed. I was a different person when I walked out of there. God had forgiven me, and I was ready to start this new life, a life apart from drugs and alcohol. But I didn't know how to do that. I honestly didn't. And if the day I got out of jail, I went to and found a church, a Baptist church that I knew of in town, and that became my family, man. That I didn't hang out with any of my old friends. I had to get a whole new set of friends. I found out really quick, church folks are kind of weird. That is a different crowd than what I was used to. They're very buttoned up, very...
Church people are very weird.
Yeah, very weird. And but you know what I liked about them? I was like, I just noticed when I hang out with these people, I don't go to jail, I don't wake up the next morning with a hangover and wondering what I did the night before. So it was cool. I enjoyed it. I was like, okay, a little bit of adjustment, getting used to them, but I like the consequences better.
And I tell this story, but when I first started going to church, I wore a turtleneck, man. I had one thrift store donated turtleneck. Yeah. And I wore it, and it was 100 degrees. I'm wearing a turtleneck. They're all looking at me like I'm crazy, And I look at them and say, I like turtlenecs, but I didn't like turtlenecks.
Yeah.
I was embarrassed. And I thought, man, these people are Leave It to Beaver, And when they find out how messed up I am, they're never going to accept me. And they don't know who I am. And I found out they're messed up too.
Absolutely.
And so...
Some people just clean up better. Some people put on a facade. And
the great theologian Joey Ramone said... we're all messed up in our own special way.
Absolutely.
And so Jesus, I'm reminded what he said when they went to bring his mom and his family to him. And they're pressing through the crowd, to get to him. And his disciples say, hey, your family's here. Your mom's here and your brothers are here. And Jesus said, who's my mother? Who's my brother? Who's my family? And he looked around at all the people there and he said, those who hear the word of God and do it, that's my family. Mm-hmm. And that's a hard reality for some, and me too, but the church is all I got. I mean, I've got some relatives out. I love them very much, but we're different. And, I'm not ashamed of that. It is what it is. But I'm so thankful for the local church, brother. And we're getting a little ahead, but that's okay. So 29 years?
26.
26.
February will be 26 years.
So 97 was 26 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
My goodness. So what, as we talked about it, just kind of give the audience an idea of what brought you to your place of brokenness, Joey. Like, what was the final straw to where you, because I teach rock bottom, and something that I tell people is rock bottom isn't a place, it's a state of mind.
Yeah.
A lot of times people will say, you know, I don't know what it's going to take for my son to hit rock bottom because he can't get any lower than he already is. He's lost his family, and he got hit by a car and almost died, and he did this and that. So what else could have happened? But it's not the tragedies, so to speak, the severity. It's that I've had enough, and it could be, you know, he could his lights could be shut off, and it could break him when losing his family did. You know, it's that state of mind. So what brought you to your place of brokenness?
Yeah, I mean, in people's lives, like you're talking about hitting rock bottom, it can always get worse. And probably the worst thing would be go 6 feet under. You know, we've seen that happen before too. You know, for me, I don't want to over spiritualize this, but God drew me. Like that was my, like, I just believe that. Like I was laying in bed. Well, so like when I first got to prison, and I went through that degrading day of being processed through like cattle, I laid
What's
on my
that look
bed.
like? There's somebody listening.
Yeah, so
they don't know.
So first of all, I'm just scared because I'm a white boy from the suburbs, and I I didn't know what it was going to be like.
Skinny white boy?
Yeah, skinny, kind of preppy looking, and I was just imagining the worst. That's what I had in my mind, and so when I got through, when they processed through, and I was in Fulton, they put us in the gym, and there was like 60 bunk beds lined up, so there's just tons of guys in there. And when I got to my bunk, the only thing I could do was lay on my bunk and face down because I was hiding the tears. And I just laid there and cried all the rest of the time, the rest of the night. And I felt like, I was like, oh, crap, man, I can't let people see this. And I looked over, and the bunk next to me was this big old black dude doing the same thing, crying. It was his first day too, and I was like, "That's what happens, man. That everybody's first day."
Did you give him a fist bump?
We just looked at each other, and he was just like, he knew, but it helped me because I was just like, I felt like I was weird and different, but I noticed everybody did that, and for me, it was just reality set in that this is my life, and I tell people this like, So my dad, around that same time, got cirrhosis of the liver and ended up dying from that, but he got saved right before that. And I don't think that my dad would have ever given his life to Jesus if that was his rock bottom. Like, I think that God allows us to do those things. I tell people going to prison for me was the best thing that ever happened to me. I would either be dead or still in prison or out there selling. I don't think I'd still be going because I was going hard. But so going to prison was a blessing for me. A lot of people look at it and go, they're mad because why would God send me to prison? But maybe it's his only way of getting your attention. For me, that was the case because now he had my undivided attention. I was scared, and I told God that same day, the very first day, I said, God, if you get me out of this, I'll go be a missionary in Africa. I didn't even know what that meant, and I just felt, there was nothing, like, because I wasn't serious. I wasn't sincere. But the day I went, so we were in Boonville, and it was regimented, man. I was in 28 house, and we had to go to drug classes all day. You got up at 5 o'clock, you made your bed, you went to breakfast, and you weren't allowed to sit on your bunk until 9 o'clock at night, just going to drug classes and stuff every day. They brought in a drill sergeant and physical training. We did all that stuff. But Sunday was the only day we got to sleep in. So I was sleeping. It was like 10 o'clock in the morning, and I heard some music going on in the basement. And it was kind of like a dormitory. It was like 3 levels in this building. They were having a church service down there, and something woke me up. Something drew me. I know it was the Holy Spirit, but I just felt compelled. I got to get up, got to get dressed. There were 2 dudes in my room. I was like, hey, let's go to this church service. So they're like, all right. They walked with me downstairs. And by the time we got down there, I walked into this room, and when I walked in the door, the pastor was up, the chaplain was up preaching at that time, and something just hit me, and I just started bawling. Like I'd never experienced that before. I didn't know what it was. The two guys with me were like, "What is wrong with you?" I was like, "I don't know," and I was just bawling. And then we sat on the back row, and I listened to this guy talk about forgiveness, and he said, "No matter what you've done in your life, God would forgive you." And I sat back there going, "Man, would God forgive me?" And so I was just replaying. I don't need to. I wrote a book about a lot of this stuff, and I'm not trying to glorify any of the crazy stuff I just did. I just do tell people that for context. I was a horrible person, man. I should be in hell right now, and God had mercy on me. And I sat back there playing out some of the worst things that I've done to people, and I was like, would God forgive me of that? And I felt God's Holy Spirit speak to me about everyone. Yeah, I'll forgive. Jesus died on the cross for that. And this dude gave an invitation at the front at the end of that, and I was the first one. Man, I sprinted up there. I was like, if God is willing to take my life after all I've done to hurt all these people, if he's still willing to take my life, I'm willing to give it to him. And I didn't know what he could do with my life, but he took it and put me back together. I had a bunch of broken pieces. And from that moment, man, I had tears in my eyes, and I walked up there and I prayed to receive Christ. I wiped the tears out, and I had a smile on my face. I was overcome with joy. I don't think everybody has an emotional experience when they get saved, but in that moment, I felt like God just reached down and picked up a ton of bricks. All this weight I was carrying, just in a moment. As soon as I prayed to receive Christ, he lifted that off, and I was a new person, man. Walked around with a smile. I was in there for another month after that. Walked around with a smile on my face. Everybody thought I was crazy, but they gave me a little pocket New Testament, and they opened it up. This guy, he opened it up and highlighted 2 Corinthians 5:17.
Don't worry about that. Just keep
and
going.
he said,
something just fell. So
yeah.
if you didn't see it off the wall, but go ahead.
And it said, he highlighted this first time I'd ever read that, and he goes, if any man be in Christ, he's a new creation. Old things have passed away. Behold, all things have become new. And I was like, and he showed me that. He goes, see that? Everything you've ever done, it's been washed in the blood. You're forgiven. You're a brand new person. And I was like, that's good news for me. And I believed it. I was one of those crazy people. I believed it. And so when I got out, started seeing old people, that I had done wrong. I still, it's crazy. 26 years later, I recently invited someone to church that I went to school with. And she was like, well, you did me, this was like 6 months ago. She goes, you did me wrong back in high school, and I still haven't forgiven you. She goes, so you're going to have to apologize before I come to church. I was like, hey, I was a dirtbag back then. So I'm sure, I don't even remember what I did to you, but I'm sure it was bad. And then one of my other friends, they said they ran into someone just like a couple months ago. And this girl was like, yeah, Joey messed me over back in school, and just some crazy stuff. And I was like, I'm 26 years later, still having to apologize for stuff I did. But they have every right to hold it against me. I was a bad person back then, but the cool thing is too, that I get to share with them. That's not the person I am anymore, and it's by the grace of God. It's not me. I'm not a better person because I work harder at it. Man, I'm redeemed. God had grace on my life, and any good thing about me is the grace of God in my life. So,
how old were you when you got saved again?
22. About to turn 23.
So when you got out of prison, you were 23?
Mm-hmm. No, I was 22, but a couple weeks later, I turned 23. Yeah. So,
did you look up to your father as a role model when you was growing up? Who'd you look up to?
Oh yeah, my dad was I now remember when it changed. We grew up. We always kind of lived on a ranch, and we always had horses. So I was just all about that. My dad was my idol, man. I just looked up to him so much. But then he started beating me and throwing things at me. One time he just really had a real bad anger problem. One time he threw a hammer and hit me, but one time when I was about 11 or 12 years old, we were out in the yard working, and my dad goes, my brother that died his name was Jeff, and my dad looked at me one time and he said, he was just angry. Some silly thing that I did, and he was just like, man, why couldn't you have died instead of your brother? And when he said that, man, I just went, oh my gosh, like I hate this dude. Like I want this guy dead. And every ounce, everything that I had as far as respect for him turned into hate. And he said it 3 or 4 other times on different occasions. It's like, you know, and I've had to get counseling about that, because, you know, that was part of the trauma, part of the brokenness that I had. Like, there's I always talk about it, but there's the one book that changed my life was Wild at Heart by John Eldridge. And that book talks about trauma that we had. He talks about how most people, every man needs to read that book. It'll change your life. And every woman should read it, because it'll help you understand men, how we're different. Well, men and women are just wired different. And he just talks about, I remember years ago when I first heard this, he goes, most people have a wound in their soul, and usually it was put there by your father, by either what he said or what he didn't say. And for me, it was what he said. When he told me that he wished that I was dead instead of my brother, that just crushed me. And it created a wound that, I'll be honest with you, I've got counseling for it, and I've worked through it. I've tried to process through that. But those types of things never go away, you know. And people will say, well, how could you say something to your kid? Well, that's an interesting thing, and it probably goes along with what this podcast is. My dad was a very broken person. I mean, he's a very manly person. He's not going to sit down on a couch and talk about his feelings with anybody. And so whenever you have stuff like his dad died, like his son died, and then his dad died a couple years later, and he had other stuff going on, who's he going to talk to about that? You know, he's not involved in a church. He wasn't a Christian. And so his way of dealing with things was to take it out on us. He would binge drink. He would go get drunk with his friends, and then show up 4 days later wasted and mad at us and throwing things and beat up my mom and all this stuff. And no, obviously that's not right, but he was broken. Like there's times I see people, I'm driving down the road and I'll maybe accidentally cut somebody off or something, and they'll just have road rage. And what I think is, man, that person's not mad at me. They don't even know me. I'll have people sometimes that I'll meet and just go off on me for no reason. And now it used to, you know, the way I was raised, I was like, what, you know, we take it outside, you know, that's how I feel. But now I know, man, your problem's not with me. And so I go, man, what is this person going through that they would treat me that way? And we all go through stuff, and we got to make sure that we can. This is what the Bible helps, and it helps to be in men's groups, and it helps to be able to have accountability partners and somebody that we can share what's going on with. Because otherwise, if you don't process, everybody's going through junk. Everybody's got trauma. Everybody's got stuff that happened as a kid that lingers into your adulthood. And if we don't figure out ways to deal with these in a healthy way, it comes out in unhealthy ways, and you yell at your kids, or you get mad at your boss at work, and he's riding you all day, and you go home and kick the dog, right? The dog didn't do anything to you, but that's the way you took it out. So we're broken. Everybody's broken. And this back to what we were talking about earlier. I appreciate church people who are transparent, and I found that people resonate with my insecurities, and when I'm real with them about my brokenness, that'll help people much more than me bragging about all the accomplishments. I mean, somebody might look at, oh, you've done this. Oh, that's nice, but they're not going to connect with me on that. I'm not going to be able to help them with their life. But when I tell them, hey man, I'm a pastor and I still struggle with stuff, and I've got a past too, well, that helps them. It helps them realize, man, even religious people, even church people have stuff because everybody's going through something. Yeah. Everybody's fighting a battle today, and so you just need to realize that.
So your dad was your hero, and just trying to focus on the past before we get into all the great things God's doing in your life. And you were the bad boy BBC, yeah. And then we came along, and now you kind of paved the way for the rest of us. But when you grew up, who did you want to be?
Yeah, I don't know. When I was a teenager, I was into like rap music, NWA, and all those things. I mean, just all of the wrong. So much about my life's perspective has changed since I became a Christian. Today, my heroes are missionaries who go. They raise their hand and they go, you know what? I'll go anywhere you tell me to, God, and I'll do anything you ask me to do. And God's like, bet, I want you to go to Mongolia. I just had Chris Ballinger at my church, and he took his family to Mongolia. I mean, middle of nowhere. I mean, that's a sacrifice. I'm like, that guy, Patrick Mahomes, I love the Chiefs, I love watching. Patrick Mahomes ain't a hero, He might play with pain, but he's not sacrificing his life. First responders, police, military, but missionaries, people. That's who I want my kids to look up to. I want, Tim Tebow, somebody. If you're gonna look to an athlete, look to somebody like that.
What about your childhood, though? Do you remember who you looked up to?
I'm really
who you wanted to be like?
No, probably a drug dealer. I don't know.
Tell us about
Probably
your darkest time. If you can, to where, for me, I'll just give you an example.
Yeah.
When I think about my darkest time, I think of living on the street. I was a drug dealer, and I talked to. I said I never used cocaine. I never used hard drugs. I never smoke anything. I didn't smoke cigarettes, but I was like anti-cigarettes. My mom died of lung cancer. Anti any of that. And I would treat people who smoked crack and did cocaine as less than human.
Yeah.
I wouldn't call them by their name. I call them crackhead. So if you smoke crack and I sold you dope, I said, come here, crackhead. And I was horrible. Mm-hmm. I became one. And I remember I stunk so bad that you could. So I would go to there was a dope house I'd go to in the hood. And these people were creatures of the night. They were the bottom, scraping the bottom of the barrel. A nasty, filthy place where you didn't even want to sit on the furniture, And I would go there, and they would make me go to the bathroom, and I had dope to get them high with, and they would make me put my clothes in a trash bag, and my shoes and socks, and they would give me a change of clothes, and I'd have to take a bath before I could even start partying there. That's how bad I stunk. Now you know how dark it was, right? Mm-hmm. And I reflect on that, and so now today, I'm really clean. Like I have a phobia that I always want to smell good, and I always want to be clean. I want to make sure I take a good shower every day, and I wash my face with facial soap and this, and I have these things I do because of the past, right? Because I remember that darkness. Mm-hmm. And so if your darkest time, Joe, if you could just share that with our people, because we're talking about your broken life, and one broken life at a time. So we're talking about that, the old man before you really came into this new life in Christ. So what would you tell them?
Probably similar. It's one of those things where a lot of people find themselves, they look in the mirror and they don't recognize the person that they are. And for me, it was, I used to always say I would never be like my dad. Like, I'm never going to be like him. And then I turned out just like him. And so sort of a snapshot into time would be right before, maybe, around the time my daughter was born. I had this apartment. All my friends were living there. It was a drug house. They were coming and going. And I got on meth. And the first time I ever... it's one of those things, like I drank all the time, and I think I was maybe 20 or 21 when I first tried meth, and I used to look down, like all my friends were doing it, but I noticed that a lot of people who were doing meth, we were smoking it out of light bulbs, they were, and their teeth would turn black, and I'm like, I like my teeth, like I was one of those things, I was just like, sensitive about that. So I was like, I drink and I'll do all kinds of other drugs, cocaine or whatever, but I wasn't going to do meth. Well, one day we were at a bar, we were at a club, and I got super drunk. And so my rational thinking skills were out the window. So my friends were like, let's go out and do a bump. So I was like, all right, I'll try this. I did it one time. I was hooked. For the next probably year, I was doing it every single day, and I became the person that I despised. I became a person that I was like, I didn't recognize who I was in the mirror. So the snapshot is I had this apartment, and we had drugs everywhere, and people were coming and going, and I remember cooking crack cocaine in the kitchen, and we had I would stay up all night looking out the window, and these trees would turn into humans and then back to trees. I was just hallucinating. And we'd pull the couch in front of the door because I was sure the cops were going to break in any minute. I ran into somebody, they're like, yeah, you're under investigation. The cops are coming to your... So I was like, they're going to be here any minute. Just paranoid all the time. And my mom came over one day. She walked in and she was like, what is going on here? And I had 2 guns on the couch. And she never said anything. But it was like just a moment where I was just like so ashamed. She looked down and I looked over at the gun. And she looked at me, and we didn't say anything, but I just like felt like a piece of crap. And I was like, gosh, man. And I wanted to change, but I didn't know how. Even the birth of my daughter wasn't enough to change me. I just didn't have the willpower. And that was probably the darkest moment of my life, just knowing that I was in this hole, and it was getting darker and darker, and I was getting worse and worse, and I didn't know how to get out. I didn't know that there was any help for me. And that's why it was so depressing. I got really depressed about life. If I wasn't such a coward, I probably would have took my own life.
Me too.
Honestly.
I remember police pulling me over walking down the street, skin and bones, man. And he said, come here. He said, I'm going to find you in a ditch dead one day if you don't get help. I mean,
yeah.
You know, why'd he tell me that? You know what I mean? So we're gonna pick this back up in part 2, Joey. Talk about your point of surrender and how how God used that all that big old mess, all the things that happened in your life to bring you to that place of surrender, so He could renew you and redeem you and save you and change you. And now today, you're 20-something years sober and living for the Lord in ministry, preaching the gospel. You have a recovery ministry. We'll talk a little bit about your recovery ministry and what you're doing up in the Kansas City area. And so if you've enjoyed this podcast today, would you do me a favor? Would you subscribe? Would you share with your friends? And if you want to support what we're doing here, you can go to Freeway, FREEWAY -ministries.com, and you can become a monthly supporter or a one-time supporter, because all this is done through the ministry of Freeway Ministries, and we would be very grateful for that. So we're going to have part 2 where Joey's going to talk about what God has done through that brokenness. And so thank you, Joey.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate you being here. We'll see you guys next time.